Welcome in. This is a segment from the Slumpbuster Fantasy Football Podcast with Aris Blakeney. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy.
We had already mentioned the Holy Trinity in Kelsey, Kittle, and Ertz. But rounding out the top five, you have O.J. Howard and Evan Ingram. How do you like these guys?
Well, I mean, it's really just all about those three guys. So I would say there is kind of an interesting thought. So the idea behind drafting these guys is the lack of depth at the position at tight end as a whole. That's what largely was what contributed to Rob Gronkowski consistently being a late first round, early second round pick over his existence in his prime. But we talk about tight end like there's no one there. But there are some names that interest, obviously, not to get too much into these guys as we move down the rankings, but obviously you talk about an Njoku, you talk about Evan Ingram, you talk about Mark Andrews potentially late. It just depends on how much risk you're willing to play with this position. Like if you want to have someone that's going to be safe, you could count on their week-to-week production, then Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, those are the guys for you. You have to accept that they're going to make you weaker at other positions. If you draft these guys, you're probably going to be weaker at wide receiver or running back. And that's going to come down to your ability to be up to par in your in-season management. I find myself, I'm taking Kelsey in a lot of drafts, and that's because I believe the offense he's in Kansas City is so dynamic, so explosive, and he has a set amount of targets, an established role, that this guy will live up to his fantasy value. Kittle is a bit of a question mark, and that's kind of hard to say because obviously I love George Kittle, but I loved him more when I was drafting him in the 9th round last year. I don't know how I feel about drafting him quite yet in the 3rd round. And then Ertz, there are question marks with him because he's being challenged by Dallas Goedert right now, could potentially be in a big sophomore season for him. Pretty much the only one out of this tier I really 100% would draft if he's still on the board in the early 2nd round or even the late 1st round is going to be Kelsey.
Yeah, one of the more interesting guys is going to be Evan Ingram. You know, last year when he was healthy, he was very productive. And then you lose OBJ, you lose all of his target share. That's going to have to go to somebody. And they really don't have any pass catching receivers. You need Sterling Shepard. You have Golden Tate when he comes back. So Evan Ingram could turn out to be the leading receiver on that team as well. But he hasn't shown that he can stay healthy as well. So that's going to be his big question mark.
And I mentioned O.J. Howard earlier. O.J. Howard, when Winston has played in the past, those have been his best games as a fantasy tight end. I feel like it's hard to believe that Bruce Arians is going to completely break Winston of all his habits, all his go-tos. So this is where I see O.J. Howard potentially being a shine if you have to get him in the 4th or 5th round. Evan Ingram, like you mentioned, by virtue of him being really the only one there. I mean, I'm sure you have Sterling Shepard there, but Evan Ingram's going to be Eli Manning's favorite target over the middle. So I like him, just we haven't seen him necessarily week after week produce where you want a tight end you're drafting at that range.
Yeah, if you can't get the Holy Trinity, I would probably just sit there and wait until you get down to a little bit, lower rounds where you can pick up some of these flyer guys who are going to be not as productive, but still pretty productive. So let's go on to the next set. We have Hunter Henry, Vance McDonald, Delaney Walker, David Njoku, and Jared Cook. We have a couple guys coming off of injury in Hunter Henry and Delaney Walker, and then Jared Cook switched teams. So who do you like in this range?
Well, Jared Cook is probably the most interesting out of this group to me. Now, Jared Cook's career has largely been personified by underperformance or not living up to potential. And then he went to Oakland last year, and he was Derek Carr's favorite target. So it's going to be interesting to see whether those skills translate over to New Orleans. We did talk about the lack of producers on the outside wide receiver position. And in the past, obviously, we remember the days of Jimmy Graham. Drew Brees has utilized his tight ends. Even beyond Jimmy Graham, he utilized Ben Watson, who was at the tail end of his career, to be a productive fantasy tight end. So I do think that there's potential there. At minimum, I think Cook is going to be one of those high floor type performers. When you talk about the high ceiling of this group, you're talking about David Njoku probably. Njoku, whenever Baker really took the reins last year, started to flash his most potential that he ever has in his career to this point. And the guy's a monster. The guy's a physical specimen. And I could definitely see that only increasing, especially knowing that there's a few people, there's going to be less shine on him now that you have, again, the shiny new pieces in the offense. He's going to get open a little bit more.
Yeah, so my interesting pick for this group is going to be Delanie Walker. He's coming off of an injury. He is his quarterback's favorite target. You know, the receivers in Tennessee really haven't established themselves, you know, like some would like them to establish themselves. So he is getting a bit older. He's, you know, might lose a step after an injury like that. So, you know, he's going to be interesting. Currently at 115. That's a pretty good pick for a tight end. And then you have Vance McDonald, who for some reason the Steelers don't like using tight ends. I don't know why. They have Jesse James, Vance McDonald, and there's going to be a lot of targets to go around since AB is gone. So can he finally take that step into a top tight end position?
Well, you know, we have seen this offense utilize Heath Miller in the past, and he had a very productive career under Big Ben. So it is interesting. So now with AB gone, they might have to revert to some of the old Steeler ways. And maybe that's really utilizing their tight ends again. Maybe that's what conducive to their success moving forward. Yeah, maybe there is potential with Vance McDonald. At minimum, he's definitely what you'd consider a bully. I mean, I still remember that. You remember that stiff arm against Cristian?
That was beautiful. That play was beautiful.
I think that's enough reason to draft him.
I'll draft him first overall just for that stiff arm, because that man, he embarrassed that DB.
I think he made him retire, or at minimum to put him to the IR. Not to get too much on a tangent about this guy, but yeah, I love Vance McDonald after that.
Yeah, I just want to be that hype man that was in the background pointing and with the O face laughing at the DB that got a stiff arm. That's probably the best picture on the internet right now.
Well, we learned from that whole situation, apparently you could get put on the injured list out of sheer embarrassment.
Yes, poor guy. So let's go into the next set. We have Kyle Rudolph, Mark Andrews, Trey Burton, Eric Ebron, and then Jack Doyle. I have these guys on here just because they lose Andrew Luck. Might want to settle for, over the middle, safe type throws to get Brissett's confidence up. So we'll see how that develops, but that's why I have them on here. What do you feel about these guys?
I just don't know if there's enough to go around in the passing game. They're going to, at most, is Brissett going to throw more than 20 times a game, even at his peak? So, and then you split that not only between those two guys and Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron, but they really like Mo Alley Cox as well. And I like saying the name Mo Alley Cox. So, but the bottom line is I just don't believe necessarily in this Colts passing attack, knowing what I saw in 2017. When it comes to just in general this tier, I like Mark Andrews. He's a good late round still potentially. You mentioned him earlier, even though they're not going to throw the ball a ton, someone is going to have to catch the ball when they do. And I don't necessarily know if that's going to be Hollywood Brown over the top or if that's going to be Mark Andrews over the middle. Based off what I've seen from Baltimore in the past, I'm going to assume it's going to be Mark Andrews. And the cool thing about Mark Andrews is he is a bit more of a run after catch kind of guy too. So he could take a little dump off by Lamar Jackson and turn that into a bigger play and turn that into a few touchdowns. So week to week, I'm not going to buy into Mark Andrews stock, as again, there's going to be just times where he's just phased out of the game plan entirely in favor of the run. But there's going to be some blow up weeks in there that you could still potentially on the right matchup.
Yeah, my favorite guy in this one is Kyle Rudolph. I love Rudolph. He's a big time player. He catches the ball in the red zone. There was a year there where he had, 7 touchdowns in the red zone. He led the league in red zone touchdowns. He's kind of fallen off, and Cousins tends to not use tight ends for some reason. He likes throwing it to the outside receivers a bit more. So since, Cousins has come onto the offense, his production has fallen just a bit.
I would say that Cousins in Washington certainly was able to utilize his tight ends when you talk about Jordan Reed had some of his better years out there, albeit Reed always struggles with the
concussions,
the injuries, everything like that. So when Reed was out of the game plan, it's hard to really make Niles Paul a fantasy relevant tight end. However, the thing about that Kyle Rudolph that always worries me is you do mention that he's a big target in the red zone. That's fantastic. He's going to get you a touchdown from time to time. But for the same reason I mentioned with Mark Andrews, if you're looking for consistency in the game plan, there are just going to be weeks where Kyle Rudolph's going to put a flat 0 on your board. And I don't need to tell anyone, no one wants that. And that's why I'll probably not buy into a lot of Kyle Rudolph stock.
Yeah, it's probably the worst feeling in the world when you start a guy and he gets you a big fat goose egg. Nobody likes that. And it seems like the tight end position has more of those people than any other position out there.
And that's why we go back to the Holy Trinity there. You just like that consistency. You like knowing that there are going to be targets there. And that's why you draft those guys early, because as you get deeper here, you're really just taking chances. You're really just closing your eyes and hoping for the best.
So on that, this next group of guys, they're pretty interesting. You have Jimmy Graham, Greg Olsen, Austin Hooper, Uzama, I can never say his name right, and then Chris Herndon. I wish we had TJ Who's Your Mama's back.
So we can say that the Bengals probably provide us with the most interesting names.
Yeah, they do lead the league in players with weird names, as in Chad Ochocinco, TJ Houshmandzadeh, and now Uzama. So they definitely do lead the league in unique names. But who do you like out of this next group?
Okay, well, as hard as his name is to pronounce, I think that Uzama is probably the most exciting out of this group. Well, I do like Chris Herndon a little bit too as well. So probably those guys are probably the more interesting out of this list. Hooper's going to get you about 3 to 4 targets, so he's probably the most consistent out of these guys, albeit it's going to be countered by Hooper is not going to give you a blow-up week. Hooper's, on average, is going to get you close to 8 to 10 points if you're in a PPR league. And if you're in a standard league, you're not going to be so fortunate. You're going to hope he got into the end zone, and that's going to be it. Now, you got the old guard here, so Jimmy Graham and Greg Olsen. What it's going to come down to ultimately is Greg Olsen's health. I mean, the guy's just missed a lot of games the last couple of years because his foot keeps breaking on him. And I don't know about you, but I like my big receiving targets to at least have 2 healthy feet on them minimum.
Yeah, Greg Olsen has the highest potential out of this group. If he can stay healthy, he's Cam Newton's favorite target. Mm-hmm. He's going to put up monster numbers. But these last 2 seasons, it's been, health questions with him. And then Jimmy Graham is just on his last leg, especially with Aaron Rodgers. Most people drafted him high, thinking that he would have he went from Breeze to Wilson to Rodgers. They felt like he was just going to have another seamless transaction over, but kind of trickled off here. I don't know if it's just he lost the step or if, what's going on there, maybe health reasons or what. So.
Well, it's a combination of 2 things. It's not just health with Jimmy Graham. It's not just his aging. It's also because Aaron Rodgers has never really been too fond of utilizing his tight ends. And he's always had dynamic playmakers on the outside, so there hasn't been a huge need. He did use Jared Cook a couple of years ago to the highest level of his abilities outside of what he did in Oakland. However, for the most part, there's been a lot of average players out of the tight end position when it comes to the Packers. No one's really shined, and Jimmy Graham certainly wasn't one either to do such in this offense. And yeah, Greg Olsen, you're right. Like, he could potentially be in the top 5 at the end of the year. It just, you feel comfortable taking him given what you know about his injuries. I personally don't, because it just seems like his feet are so fragile right now. He's an aging receiver. It's a risk. And although you have to take some big risk in fantasy if you want to win some of these leagues, especially the deeper leagues, I don't know if that's a risk you necessarily take unless you get the right value, which if he's going at where he is right now, maybe you do it.
Yeah, pick 124. That's not a bad area to try to take a risk, especially if you are in the early part of the league and you get, one of the Holy Trinity. Heck, take a flyer on Greg Olsen. You already have a top tight end. You might just say, screw it, let's see how he does and draft him as either a flyer, a flex player, or, he actually does pop off and bam, you have 2 top tight ends.
And here's what I'll say, too, with that. The problem, though, with drafting Greg Olsen is knowing that I'm going to have to draft a backup tight end. Now, there's been a general draft philosophy and one that I tend to agree with of not drafting two tight ends. However, I feel compelled to when I do take Olsen, just given, again, I'm uncertain about his health. But if you do draft him and you do have to take a backup tight end, I would say at least minimum, and we're going to talk about these guys coming up, but at least take a guy who's younger, who has potential for a blow-up year, like a TJ Hawkinson, like a Noah Fant, one of those guys if you're going to draft a veteran like Olsen.
Yeah, and those guys are actually in our next tier. So let's actually move on to those. We have Dallas Goedert, sophomore campaign. Matt LaCrosse, who's actually an interesting pick because he moved from Denver, where he was underutilized, to New England, who he's going to be filling in for Gronk. Not saying that he is Gronk, but he is taking that spot of Gronk. And then you have two rookies in Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson. And then since the tight end position is so barren, you round out with Jordan Reed, who can never stay healthy. But right now he's going undrafted, and, he might have a couple good games for you, but he can't stay healthy. That's his problem. So, what do you feel about these young guys here?
Well, the young guys I feel good about. I just want to touch on Jordan Reed real quick. So he just experienced his 7th concussion. We had a big debate on the Slumpbuster with Juju Dre about concussions a couple weeks ago. And when I start hearing that number creep up to 7, I think it's just time to retire at this point. We care about Jordan Reed's long-term health, and I don't want to tell a guy what he has to do, but I think at this point it's time to call it a career. Now, when I move into talking about Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson, so these dynamic Iowa tight ends, I don't know what it is about them, but they've been able to produce some good ones the last couple of years when you couple them with George Kittle. Hawkinson is probably the one that excites me the most, just based off what I've heard out of camp. There's a lot of people that are actually down on Noah Fant, given what he's done in the Broncos practices. From what I'm hearing, he has veteran receivers like Emmanuel Sanders and even not so veteran receivers like Cortland Sutton going up to him and telling him basically, what the fudge are you doing? Like, because he's stopping short on routes. He looks out of breath. He looks quote unquote fat, which, fat for some of these guys. I mean, I'm fat.
Yeah.
But, with that said, it's like he's been in Denver for a while right now here, at least the last few months, and he still hasn't adjusted to the elevation changes. That's kind of worrisome for his long-term value. TJ Hawkinson, though, from all indications, has meshed very well with Matthew Stafford and could be a red zone beast. So I do like when I hear that, not to mention, and this probably goes more into his real life value, but he's one of the better blocking tight end prospects in recent years too. So if you're going to talk about Kerryon Johnson as well, to kind of couple this with Kerryon Johnson, you're talking about improved running game, which is going to feed into an improved passing game, better offense, more touches for TJ Hawkinson. And yeah, we're maybe talking about this guy jumping into the top 10, top 12 at the end of the year.
Yeah, so being that he's a really good blocker, that's actually really beneficial for tight ends because now, if you bring on a tight end who's just known for receiving, well, there's always going to be somebody spying on him. If he's really good at blocking, though, the play action pass comes into play now, and he's going to be on the field for more, more snaps, which in fantasy you want to be on the field because that means more opportunities to get the ball. So if he's sitting there blocking and play breaks down or something like that, you just dump off to the tight end right then and there. So being a better blocker at the tight end position, probably beneficial for, most of these guys. We don't see many of these guys as blocking tight ends.
You're right. His ability to block, his ability to pass, that's just going to keep him in the game. He's not going to get ridden out of game scripts because he's going to be on the field one way or the other, which is, again, something that you may not necessarily be able to say about a Noah Fant, just given that if he's mostly known as a receiving tight end, he's going to get taken off the field from time to time. And that's also going to in turn make their offense a little bit more predictable. Now, to mention Dallas Goedert, though, so Goedert has received a lot of love in the fantasy community in recent months. And one comparison I heard is he's like a younger Zach Ertz, which is going to be interesting to see those guys on the same team. And in fact, too, when Ertz goes out, or at least last year, and Goddard came in, you almost couldn't identify which was which from time to time. They do look like photocopies of each other. So Ertz struggled with injuries at points in his career. If Dallas Goedert has the opportunity, he could potentially take the ball and roll with it. But ultimately, in regards to this year, his value is going to be capped just by the value of you have those two guys working off of each other, not necessarily in tandem. If you're in a dynasty league, Dallas Goedert all the way, though.
Yeah, and the last guy, Matt LaCrosse, he's going to a team that loves tight ends. For some reason, Bill Belichick wants to have a pass-catching tight end. He wants to throw to the tight end position. I don't know if he just sees that it's a bigger mismatch on linebackers who can't cover as well. So he might be a decent. Right now he's going undrafted. He might be a good little streamer. After the first couple of weeks, where we actually see his role in this offense. And Gronk is gone, so those passes have to go somewhere. And if he can stay healthy, and if he's as good as Bill Belichick thinks he is, because he's obviously on this team, he might be the next grocery boy to Super Bowl MVP on the Patriots roster.
Like we said, though, once we start getting in this point of the tight end discussion, it just really is a matter of you're throwing darts blindfolded and you're hoping they land on touchdown.
Yeah, pretty much. The tight end position, outside of the Holy Trinity and outside of the top 10, you're going to be struggling all year looking at matchups, see who's has a weak passing defense that you might be able to pop off 5 to 7 points, hopefully on, or even 8 points with a touchdown. So, it's very hit or miss with the tight end